TipTut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut. Today we're taking a look at basic composition theory. This is part of the Basics for Beginners series, for which you'll find a bunch of links at the end of this video, so you can go check out the other videos in that series. But today, basic compositional theory. Let's dive right in. Essentially, a well-balanced composition feels right. It feels correct. And the human brain is sort of hardwired to find this pleasing, because when you look at something, you like to think that it understands and obeys the laws of physics as we perceive them. So subconsciously, that makes you feel good, essentially, when you look at a well-balanced composition. Now, the laws of compositional theory, balance is not mandatory, but you do have to understand the rules. It's okay to break them as long as you understand what they are. So let's start off with visual balance then. The concept is twofold. There's visual weight and visual direction. Now, visual weight refers to how much an object draws the viewer's attention, and the understanding of how much weight an object would have if it were to exist, essentially. And that's what we mean when we say visual weight, the amount of attention an element draws. Whereas visual direction refers to the perceived force on the object. And what that means in simple terms is if that object were real, what direction would it be going in? How fast would it be traveling? If the laws of physics applied to this object, how would it be moving? And how would those forces interact with it? And that's what I mean by visual direction. So balanced artwork has a number of pros and cons. In its very nature, it's desirable, because of, like I said before, the understanding of how we perceive objects in the real world. If art follows that as well, subconsciously we find it very pleasing as human beings in general. But it's really great at portraying different elements of equal importance. For example, if you have two elements on a page which are both the same size and shape, people's attention is going to be divided equally between them, and therefore they're going to perceive that they are equally as important as each other. And it's great at conveying a sense of correctness or serenity and, well, balance, essentially. Now, unbalanced artwork isn't sort of wrong. It can be unsettling or uncomfortable to view, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If that's what you want to convey, then obviously an unbalanced piece of artwork is perfect for that. It's also really good at conveying the idea that some elements of a composition are more important than others. And it is kind of wonderful and horrible at the same time. It is physically unsettling, but with that you can do much more interesting things than you can with just balanced artwork, which is sometimes perceived as boring. So the different types of visual balance then. So there's symmetrical balance, which is the most simple. So we'll start there. And what essentially this means, you see it quite a lot. It's when all elements on a page are balanced around a single axis, essentially. So when elements are equally divided on either sides of a dividing line or axis, it's known as symmetrical balance. Now, it's very formal, it's very elegant, but it can be considered boring, because you look at a composition and whilst it's pleasing to the eye, nothing stands out, nothing grabs your attention immediately, as it all is quite relaxed to view. Then there's asymmetrical balance, which is a bit more complicated. Essentially, it's when a group of elements are equal in visual weight to a single larger element. For example, here we have one large circle and two taller rectangles. Now, although they are different in visual weights individually, when compared with each other and grouped via sort of position and things like that, that's how you understand the relation between them. They are equally weighted, but they are asymmetrical. So asymmetrical balance is when unequally weighted elements are balanced by a combination of other unequal elements. A visual heavy element on the left can be balanced by two or more visually lighter elements on the right-hand side of the page. Asymmetrical balance is difficult to achieve correctly, especially in complicated compositions, but it does feel quite modern. It's used quite a lot nowadays. It's very dynamic and it's full of energy. Okay, so next up then we have radial balance. This is when a series of elements appear around a central point rather than axes. They all emanate from that one single place on the composition. It's really good at conveying ideas of relationships, and I don't mean sort of romantic relationships by that. I mean visual relationships. The idea that two or more elements are linked to each other, they relate to each other. It's obviously great at conveying focus, importance, and attraction. But it is very, very important to remember that not everything can be a point of focus. So you should be reserved when using radial balance. Finally, then we have Mosaic Balance, which is the strangest kind of balance that I'm not particularly sure I'm quite as eloquent on, but I'll do my best to describe it. Essentially, Mosaic Balance is the idea that whilst no individual element has a point of focus, the overall general feeling you get of a collection of elements gives you a sense of order. It's sometimes referred to as crystallographic balance, although Mosaic Balance is fine. And it's a sort of a blend of order and chaos. So the posh way of describing it would say it lacks positional emphasis, but instead uses an overall uniformity that suggests the separate elements are parts of a larger weighted whole. And what that actually means is all the red triangles here, for example, they're not linked in any way to the yellow squares or blue circles in any uniform manner. You can see that the red triangle overlaps the yellow square in the center there, but then others, they're completely separate. They never touch. So there's no uniform sense of relationships or balance. But when you relax your eyes and you perceive it as a whole, you can see that the whole composition is a rough rectangle that's equally weighted and balanced throughout the entire piece. Like I said, a bit more complicated to use, but you see it a lot more in natural works of art, things like landscapes and things like that, obviously because it's painting from life, which sometimes isn't quite as regimented as you'd like. Difficult to achieve, but when done right, it looks really, really good. So it's important to note then that there's not necessarily one type of balance per composition. Like sub-portions of a composition can have their own symmetrical or asymmetrical balance. For example, if you look at this page directly, the text of It's Important to Note in the first paragraph, that is symmetrically balanced around an axis down the middle of the page, which you can see used quite a lot all of the time. But then the words for example and the paragraph to the right of it are asymmetrically balanced down that same axis. So it's an example of using symmetrical and asymmetrical balance within the same composition. And there's actually 2 points of symmetry and 2 points of balance just on this one single page. So talking of symmetry, the three things we just talked about, the symmetrical, asymmetrical, and radial balance and mosaic balance, four things, sorry, they all use different types of symmetry. Now, reflection symmetry is when a element or group of elements are mirrored around a central line or axis. So that's the same as a symmetrical balance, but the type of symmetry is called reflection symmetry. Rotational symmetry is when it occurs around a central point of existence. And translational symmetry, we haven't had an example of it here, but it's when a single element is repeated over differences in space. For example, a line of fence posts or lamp posts or something like that in a composition are repeated equally in no sort of reflection. So it's not a reflection or a rotation. It's a translational repetition. And the reason it's called translational is because when you move objects along a composition, you are translating them. Hence why in things like After Effects and stuff, there's the command of translate XY, which moves things positionally on a 2D plane. It's just what it's called. I don't know why. So let's go through some examples then, which will hopefully explain these a bit easier than I have. Now, magazine covers are a great place to look for symmetrical balance. You can see this very famous one here from Time, 1990 June issue. You have the large maple leaf and two warring faces on either side of the logo. And the logo itself, whilst asymmetrical because it's type, it's symmetrically weighted in terms of the bounding box of that text down the center of the entire page. Now, in the maple leaf and the two faces, that is perfectly symmetrical. It is absolutely repeated and is wonderful. It draws the focus. You know exactly where to look. There's no distracting elements. Fast forward a few years to 2009, January issue of Empire. You notice two things. Now, the subject of this photo, obviously Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, he's standing side on. So himself is asymmetrically balanced. His right arm is closer to the camera, it's larger, it takes up more space in the frame, and his left side of the body is further back. but that is then compensated for with the larger text on the left and the smaller text on the right, which is also behind the subject. Now, his larger right arm or closer right arm has smaller text next to it to compensate, and the reverse is true for the left-hand side. So this is a perfect example of two types of symmetry within one composition. The overall symmetry of the page is symmetrical. It's a symmetrical reflectional symmetry. Yes, split down the middle and it's reflected, but the individual element of those are actually asymmetrically balanced. So there's the symmetrically balanced Empire logo and the overall page, and the rest is asymmetrical. But as a whole, when you view it, it works as a whole, which also relates to the Mosaic Balance because of all the text elements and things like that. There's a lot building up that one page. So this actually uses three types of balance in one composition, but it's used very, very well. And obviously then it's coupled with things that we've spoken about before, such as color, typeface, things like that, to also convey other meanings. Empire is in bright red. It draws your eye more with the color than it does with the balance. And the other text elements are in colors that match the background tones. So whilst they are symmetrically balanced, they are less attractive to the eye than the Empire logo and the subject of the photo. So there's all sorts of different types of theory here, not just compositional theory that is in play. Move on then. So this is a photograph by Ian Branham. Thank you very much. I found it on Google. I'm sure he doesn't mind me using it. This is an example of asymmetrical balance in real life. Now you can see clearly that there's a lot of negative space in this, or background space in this photograph, but the nuclear power plant in the background is weighted asymmetrically by the log in the bottom right. Now, not only is this a wonderful use of foreground and background, but it's also a wonderful use to show that the axis doesn't necessarily have to be center to be balanced. So the top left and the bottom right can work well together. The same is true for the opposite. It doesn't have to be translationally in line with each other. Elements can be out of line but still symmetrical. And finally, with logo design here is a perfect example of radial balance, the Mitsubishi logo. Even taking into account the visual offsetting of the Mitsubishi logo, the obvious focus point here is the center of the three diamonds, which are drawing a really strong radial balance down to that center point, which just immediately and subconsciously just draws your eye directly towards the logo, even when you glance out of the corner of your eye. Really simple, really well done, really great use of radial balance. So as a exercise or homework, if you like, it's a really good idea to just browse your favorite websites and magazines and things like that and try to understand the compositional symmetry that they use. It's important to note, especially with websites, because they're built up of separate elements in themselves, that a composition can have its own weighting that is separate to the piece of it as a whole. So look at YouTube, for example. Look where you're watching right now, and down the right-hand side, you've got a selection of recommended videos and things like that. That's going to have its own compositional balance as opposed to the video window that you're watching this video in and the comments section below it. Each portion of the page will have its own symmetry and its own balance, but overall, it'll have a compositional balance too. And that's really all there is to it. Well, there's actually not. There's lots more, but that's enough for certainly a basic video for beginners. I'd just like to thank Smashing Magazine. This tutorial is heavily based on an article of theirs, which helped me get some of the words across. So thank you to those, credit where it is due. And that's pretty much it. So thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you all next time.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.